After passing through the sand louvers, Yupa arrives at a pumping windmill. Finally, he's entering the Valley of the Wind. As Yupa passes through the gate of this pumping windmill, you can see many sand louvers behind it. In other words, as I mentioned earlier, you can see that these layers of sand louvers protect the village. Farther away, the valley continues on the right. You can see layers of wind louvers or sand louvers along. These spinning windmill is for water supply. It is for pumping up the water carried all the way here to the place above. The walls and windmills are all made of stones. Generally, in the United Kingdom or its countryside, you'll see more of this kind of stone building and the brick buildings. And basically, that means it's a poor region. So, you see these structures, but these stones are not made of rocks. But as I mentioned before, probably the fragments of huge ceramic buildings that fell and shattered, which are carefully selected and piled up. Since they are not of the same size like bricks, they have to be stacked by trial and error. If they are piled up crudely, they will collapse later on. And above all, since it deals with water line, precious water will overflow and spill out into the ground. So, probably between the stones, the gap should be filled and fixed with some cement, like materials made of fine dust of ceramic raked up. As you see from the water that's coming out, what looks like a wall here is not a wall, but a Roman aqueduct. A huge one. In other words, what it does is that the water is pumped up and stored inside of the entire wall. This windmill pumps up the water from below, which is not groundwater. I will explain later, but the Valley of the Wind has a water source only about 500 meters below the castle. The source of water is first lifted from 500 meters under the castle, which is located in a relatively low position, and then sequentially pumped up from the castle to the top of the step terrace, using various windmills and finally stored here. That's why water overflows from the walls. There are water outlets here for accumulated water. Up to this position, the water is pumped up by the power of the windmill. The reason for the height difference of each outlet is to identify the water level, to see how much water is stored in it at a glance. If all of them are at the same height, you can only tell that the water left inside is up to that height. But as the water is coming out of the holes at different heights, people can tell, oh, that much water is stored in this village for now, from far away at a glance. In other words, when the water comes out only from the low outlets, everyone has to save water. When the water also comes out from the high outlets, it is safe and you can smile with relief. The viewers can understand that instantly just by looking at the picture. However, we just watch this along casually and think, hey Yupa, why don't you go to see Jill real quick? Or NAUSICAA, are you there? But as Buddha NAUSICAA, if you look carefully, you can see that the scenes are drawn based on the consideration that far. Now, the comment says, how could I know that? Or why wouldn't they explain them? I am here to explain these kind of things to you, so don't worry guys. Use me as a supplementary tool. Here the wall is filled up with water, so everyone should be happy. As Yupa passes by these pumping windmills, a huge reservoir appears. Well, even if I say huge, it's actually a modest one. Here, Yupa gives horseclaw water. And it's a modest reservoir, but for a village with a population of 500, this amount of water is quite blessed. As you can see from the geographic situation, there's a Roman aqueduct here, and the water is dropping. The reservoir is at the highest place in the Valley of the Wind. In other words, the persistence to pump up the water to this point created the reservoir. I have drawn a map of the whole structure around the Valley of the Wind, so I'll show you later. The bottom of the reservoir is covered with stones like tiles, to keep the water from escaping. It is shown in the scene where the horse claws drink water. This kind of thing is not only hard to make, but also needs a lot of time and effort on maintenance, since the inside often cracks and water seeps out. After passing by this reservoir, thanks for waiting. It's finally the Valley of the Wind. So, as Yupa talks to these old men and slowly walks toward the left side of the screen, the further left side becomes brighter. Then the panoramic view actually looks like this. And here, you can finally see the whole view of this valley. As Yupa descends the valley, he walks unsteadily through a path along the cliff. He then passes by, looking up the sand louvers, then by the windmill. After he finally passes by the reservoir, you'll see the whole setting for the first time, at the beginning of the film to show the Valley of the Wind. A lot of panning shots are used. By panning horizontally or vertically, they are trying to show a large-scale picture. This way, the windmills, about 10 of them, stand one after another all the way far out, as you can see to the castle where NAUSICAA and her father lives. That's the structure of the whole landscape. You can also see the vineyard around. After passing the reservoir and the vineyard, you can finally see the whole view of the Valley of the Wind far below. What you see below is the castle where the king lives, located about 100 to 200 meters below. Usually, royals or kings tend to live in a higher lands to overlook the distance, but the Valley of the Wind is upside down. The higher in the valley, the more dangerous it is, with incoming spores from the toxic jungle, so the king actually lives at the bottom. Those 10 windmills or so you can see from here are all pumping windmills. That is, they draw water by wind power. It isn't underground water that the windmills deal with. What they do is to lift water from its source 500 meters below the castle, pump it up by the windmills over the step terraces, one by one, and finally to the reservoir just mentioned.